So we got Mother's Day coming up. Are you, what are you doing anything special for mom?
Yeah, we're gonna make some live begonia wreaths. I love
Wow.
planting. Last we took
Wow.
a class on it, so we're gonna try to do it ourselves this
That's amazing. I almost don't want to share any of my Mother's Day plans now. I feel like I'm totally outclassed.
year.
Okay, so well then I won't. So what's all right? So as far as updates this week, we really don't have any. I know a lot of our clients are asking questions around PPP forgiveness, and for us, as frustrating as it is to say we don't have answers, we really don't have any answers. I mean, AICPA, everybody and their brother are actively petitioning for the Treasury to come out with their interim final rules related to forgiveness. It hasn't happened. So if people are giving you answers, just know they're making stuff up like everybody else. The reality is there is the same guidance that has been written for the last however many weeks. Nothing further. There's much we don't know. And so again, just stick to the guidelines, which are it's what it's eligible for: payroll, rent, mortgage, interest, utilities, and assume the most conservative view until we know more.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. So this week we sat down with Rob Harr of Sparkbox, and we talked to him about utilization and forecasting. Super great interview. So let's get into that.
Check it out. Okay, super excited for this week's interview. We have with us Rob Harr, Vice President and co-founder of Sparkbox here in Dayton, Ohio. Rob, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we're super excited to have you. I'd say, you've obviously been super involved in the Bureau of Digital, and you've done a number of talks and podcasts and those sorts of things. And a topic that you have spoken about a lot, that I really enjoy, and I think is spot on, and you do really well, is forecasting your work. So you seem to have the kind of operations hat within Sparkbox, and you've developed a really good process for using data to forecast and resource. And so maybe just start by like giving us the 30,000 foot view on how that works at Sparkbox.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It all goes back to 10 years ago or so when we were working with a business coach, because my background is in, enterprise software development, and kind of, that's what I brought to the table. I was the technical director and doing all this stuff. And, my business partners and we were trying to run a business, and we started growing, and all of a sudden, like, we had employees and we had to manage things and predict things and like all this stuff. So, I kind of had a good head for numbers and spreadsheets and loved that stuff as it was. So we hired a business coach, and one of the things he said that stuck with me to this very day is, you'll never be in control of your business until you can predict it accurately. For a studio, like the holy triangle, right, is finance, biz dev, and delivery.
Yep.
And all of that is surrounded by humans and how important humans are. But that's what operations encompasses. Like, you have to have your hands on all of that and all the feedback loops. And, from an operations perspective, in forecasting, you have to be really good at predicting what's coming, because it's a utilization game when we talk about studios. Like, these businesses aren't that complicated. If you tell me how many employees you have and if you're profitable or not, I can tell you within, pretty close what your revenue is and, what your expenses are. Like, with 68 to 70% of every dollar coming in going directly back out for employees, like, we have to be able to forecast our biggest expense. We have to be really good at it.
Well, let me ask you a couple questions on that. So first question is, in your what do you do? Like, what are you using to organize your, so, I mean, obviously, like, you've got information about your individual products. So are we doing this on spreadsheets? Are you using software to do this? And the other question is, how far into the future can you generally see with any degree of confidence?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, like, one of the things when I talk about forecasting that I always say is, and I'm going to answer your question, so don't worry.
Sure. No, go ahead.
I hate tooling parts of this talk, because the tools have to serve the process and the cadence. Right. And for all of these things, it's much more about our view on the world and having a regular cadence established, a process, something that we can follow every single week. And for us, like, we do use Harvest, we do use their forecast product that we like pretty well. I know a lot of people feel like forecast lacks a lot of features and you can't put much detail in there. And for my perspective has always been is that is a feature because
Yeah,
you
right.
can't overplay do project
That's right.
management and forecast.
Yep.
Project management belongs elsewhere, in my opinion. Forecast is an operations tool to talk about talent allocation at the highest level.
That's right. Yep.
Who's working on what over what period of time. So our cadence is pretty much set up like this in general, but on Friday before all the PMs leave, they have their most up-to-date, planning in forecast before they go home. And that changes every single week. And they're, all the horse trading and all of that stuff that happens before Friday. But as of
Yep.
Friday, we know that date is good. And
Yep.
that sets us up to run all of our stuff the next week. So at 9:30 a.m. on Monday morning, there's a thing called forecast McBotface. Why it's called that is beyond me still. Runs and it pulls all that data from forecast and sends everybody an individual Slack message that says, hey, here's what you're allocated to work on this week. Here's what, how many hours, what projects, all that fun stuff. So that runs in the morning. Timesheets are due on Monday morning for the previous week. And then, all the project planning, all that other stuff goes. And I think that any project manager who is worth their salt has project plans. They know when things are supposed to happen and all of that.
Yep.
So all we're really asking them to do every week is be able to put that plan in place and share it in a way that we can use that data so that on Tuesdays we can run, P&Ls and we can predict what our P&L is going to be if on a rolling 12 months average. We can run, micro cash where we can know exactly what invoices we're going to send and when we're going to get paid. And we'll basically be able to predict our cash flow for the foreseeable future. How far out? It depends on the project mix. Usually for the next 3 months, we have a very, very good idea where everything's going to be. And, we've got projects that we can forecast 9, 12 months out, but we can also predict what our utilization is going to be. We can make business decisions on, hey, we've got a hole in 2 or 3 weeks. Let's take a project that maybe is a little bit, maybe a little bit lower rate or whatever. So we don't have to average zeros because it's all a utilization game.
Yep, that's right. Okay, well, so you said a thing I absolutely love, which is, and it's funny, one of my partners, Craig, always says this, which is everybody thinks they have a software problem. Nobody has a software problem. Everybody has a process problem, right? And we always jump to software as the solution. That's not the solution. It's a process. And I love you guys identified that. You guys have clearly a really awesome one. And you hit on utilization, which of course is the common denominator among every agency, and it's the sort of holy grail to forecast. And so I guess maybe 2 questions on that. The first question is just, what is your utilization target? I mean, I realize that probably differs by role, but how do you guys think about what good, okay, and danger zone might look like?
Yeah. So I think most studios in our space, as long as they're at somewhere between 50 and 60%, that's where roughly their break-even point. That's what I see across most studios, right? So we're looking at, I think that every role except for project managers on our teams, we try to shoot for that 80% mark, 32 to 34 hours a week. That's what I think a good productive developer, designer, UXer, all of that stuff. And I can fill those people up to that mark and they are still productive and happy at that point. Beyond that, you start running people a little hot, you run burnout, you can't do some of the other internal initiatives.
Right.
And I think that's a good
flexible
spot
for new work. Yep.
That's right. For project managers, I have a completely different view. We set the maximum at 25 hours. And I don't look at that as much as something to fill up, but more of a warning when it reaches that point.
Got it.
Because we ask our project managers to manage, 3, maybe 4 different efforts at a time. There's context switching and there's costs there from a mental point of view for them to manage those things.
Right.
And what I find is if they get over that 25-hour mark, bad things happen to our projects. So I'm okay accepting a lower utilization on a project manager, and I'm not looking to fill that meter all the way up. I'd like to get it to about 20, but I want to be careful because I want them to have the headspace because magic happens in the in-between.
Yep. I love that. All right. Last question for you on this topic is, obviously you can forecast with a high degree of, confidence, booked revenue, stuff in the door. To what degree, if any, does your pipeline play in your forecast of people, utilization, hiring, that kind of stuff? How much credence do you give it?
Yeah, a lot. And that's why when I talk about that, go back to that holy triangle of those
Trinity,
three
yeah.
pillars, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you've got biz dev as part of that. And part of the
Yep.
feedback loop is knowing from delivery needs to know what's the capacity to sell. What do we have available to be sold? So that's one part that forecasting gives you is, hey, if we're really good at forecasting and we can accurately predict what's going to happen tomorrow, then we can be able to say like, hey, biz dev, this is what you're able to sell in these windows. That's really important so they don't oversell.
Yep.
Even though that I think there's some margin there. Like I think most studios need to act like the airlines, overbook by
Right.
20% because things fall out.
Yep.
But part of that feedback loop then is what's in the pipeline and what's the expected close date and what's the duration and what's the value of the deal, so that we can take that from a financial perspective and to marry those two ideas together.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden we can look at forecasted booked and forecasted predicted through pipeline stuff to know what our utilization is going to be, to let us
Yep.
know how are we having those conversations with clients or prospects, right? Is this a, hey, we need projects in 3, 4, 5 months out? And we look at cycle time on how long it takes to close a big deal. And, for us, we know that deals over a certain value, can take up to 3 to 6 months by the time they enter the pipeline and the time we get those contracts signed and be able to get started. That's really important. So we're able to look at the size, the profile of prospects and be able to predict based on what we know about, what they look like and what they smell like and past performance and all that stuff about how long it's going to take to close. And that's all part of that, those feedback loops between those three areas to make things run smooth. And I think the one thing I forgot to say about the forecasting that I want to make sure I make the point of real quick is like the most important thing for getting good at forecasting is getting really, really good at reporting. Because if you can't tell what happened yesterday, you have zero chance to be able to predict tomorrow.
Yep.
That's a good
because
point.
you'll have no way to know if your forecasts
right.
are correct.
Yeah.
That's great.
So that's all like the ideal world and ideal scenario and environment. What about now? How has the plan shifted with the COVID impacts? Are you
That's a great question. And I think that it's interesting because you build all these models, you build all this knowledge, and you get good in understanding what things look like and what patterns look like, right? Well, the current environment, like all of the patterns, all the things we think we knew, some of those assumptions are no longer true.
Right.
Signed contracts are walking away. We've had clients call us and say they need to change their payment terms. So that messes up our cash forecasts. We've had projects go on pause. We've had projects cancel. We've had projects in some sectors, actually budgets increase. And so it's like doing operations on quicksand a little bit in the current environment. Because, some of the things we want to be true and we thought were true, man, they don't feel as true as they used to. And, spend, for me anyway, you spend 6, 7 years building models and spreadsheets or tools and processes out. And then all of a sudden, what you thought you knew, you don't know anymore. It's like, oh, I've never had to account for a client calling me and say their, payment terms are going to double and there's no room to negotiate here. Cool.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting
So one
world.
question on that. I mean, obviously, this whole thing has changed has affected things in a couple ways. Now, on the one hand, it's made it more difficult to predict the future. On the other hand, it has changed perhaps the sort of tolerable profit margins and utilization thresholds. Right? You've got human beings on your team that both you want to keep employed and that you want to retain for a future recovery. So I'm curious, to what degree, if any, has that changed your calculus on how you make certain resourcing and staffing decisions?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely, it's definitely a survival mode. It's we're what, 8 or 9 weeks into this now, and it definitely felt like the first 4 weeks were just about hanging on for dear life. um, that I think that tone is changing. At least we're hearing it from our clients, where things are waking up. Biz dev is happening again. I think that in general, the people we're talking to from a sales perspective are starting to realize that this is the world we
Yep.
live in, and business is going to go on. And like, it's been 2 or 3 times in the last week where people that I talked to in February were like, we got plenty of time, we're not doing anything right now. Or I talked to them last week and they're like, oh my gosh, it's already May.
Yep.
We should have started a month ago. And I think that the mental difference between February to, September and October is like, oh, that's a long way
No,
away.
it sure
But
doesn't.
May doesn't sound that far
Yeah.
away anymore. And they need to move. And so, like, we're seeing those things wake up and get going, and it's pretty encouraging.
That's good. Okay, that's wonderful. All right, so that's hopefully, if nothing else, we can, folks. I mean, again, there's a couple of things, particularly on the your process that I loved hearing you say with regard to the importance of reporting, and that if we're not tracking the information, like recording hours and recording utilization, then forget about forecasting, like it's out the window. And the importance of using both your BD. I mean, that your Trinity example is such a great one, because it emphasizes and underscores the idea that business development is a discrete, critical part of your business operations. It's not this incidental, accidental, organic thing that like just shows up hopefully when you need it. And you have to measure it with the same intentionality that you would measure anything in the operations of your business. And
Anything you want to work, you got to measure.
I could not agree with you more. I really do. So I'm happy to hear you say it, because we say it sometimes, and it's nice. It's nice to have some validation. So that's wonderful. Rob, I feel like we could talk to you all afternoon, but I won't do that to you. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate that. I know that you've got a number of things that are really that you put out. That you've got a podcast. You've got a training coming up, or a webinar or something of the sorts on Friday of this week. So all that to say, like, if folks want to learn more about you and some of the things you have to say, where should we send them?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of those things. I do a podcast called Overly Human. A good friend of mine, Tracy Barrett, and I from Navigate the Journey do a weekly podcast on humans in business. It's been a lot of fun. Go check it out. Go to csparkbox.com. That's the agency studio that I run. And robharr.com is all the things that I do all over the place. I do a lot with the Bureau, the Bureau of Digital.com. I am doing a workshop this week that's talking a lot about forecasting. It's a operations for project managers workshop. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Okay. Very cool. Well, thank you so much again, Rob. Really appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Nice talking with you.
That was pretty good. What'd you think, Meredith?
I really liked it. I agreed with what he said. A few things come to mind, like specifically to our clients. The first one is the project managers definitely see the value in that, but I think that a lot of our agencies are smaller and don't have that project manager role.
Right. Yeah. So, the idea that a lot of his process, which I thought was phenomenally good and really precise, predicated around the idea that you've got these PMs doing it. And look, the reality is, just like lots of things at small agencies, of course, ultimately, you've got a bunch of generalists wearing a lot of hats, and certainly there's somebody wearing, of course, the project management hat. But of course, they are, that may look like the agency owner or another sort of director of operations who doesn't have the luxury of only having 20 to 25 hours of utilization. And so while that's aspirational, I think at this point, our agencies just have to have to adapt. But I guess the point is that doesn't make the process that he suggested, in my opinion, any less important. Right. It's just one of those things, forecasting and reporting on hours, and then forecasting on resourcing and utilization is one of those things that feels important but not urgent, right? It's that classic, it's a fire that's not burning the brightest. So it's easy to put off, but if you never get to it, then you'll never have the sort of the sustainability to scale to a level where you do have a bunch of project managers.
Yeah, agreed. I think the other thing is just getting your employees to track their time properly. I like the idea that he had like every Monday your time sheet is due. So like really like, okay, we got, in order to like and read all of this data and predict what this cycle is going to look like, we need the hard cold data. So
I appreciated it quite a bit because I feel sometimes like when we make that recommendation, we're these wet blanket nerd accountant paper pushers that are like, yeah, of course, you know, we're just raining on everybody's parade with these awful processes.
Yeah.
But here's a guy who lives these operations in an agency saying, of course, the same thing, right? Like I get it, you know, and
Yeah.
it's not certainly not the most fun activity, but it just boils down to like if you don't have data to make decisions, then you're just flying blind. How did you? Well, I guess one other question for you is, you know, I personally also loved his Trinity analogy and the fact that business development was a core component, right? That was one of the three, and his point about the need to measure business development activities and use that for forecasting. What was your take on that? How how do you see that play out?
I
Or what
love that he
challenges do you see
said
with our
anything worth
clients?
doing is worth tracking, or anything. I can't remember the verbiage, but
Yeah, I think you got the gist of it.
yeah, totally agree. Like if we're gonna do this, like we've got to track somehow. Like we've got to start tracking it at a base level so we can. It's all about predicting the cycle, the sales cycle, the revenue cycle, the pipeline. Like we have to have this data in order to do that.
Yeah, and I could not agree more. And again, I would say that we, you know, particularly smaller agencies often don't have a formal business development
Right.
role, right? And there aren't a ton of intentional activities occurring. It's organic and it's referral. And while that's a totally separate topic we could go down, even if that is your source of leads in business, that doesn't mean that there's not value in tracking it.
Right.
There absolutely is. We can use that information. Okay, great. Like regardless of who you are, you're getting people who are potentially interested in buying you, and they got to you somehow. They talked to a person, they saw you online, they heard from a friend, and some subset of them, but certainly not 100%, ultimately going to buy your thing for some amount of money. All that information is really, really critical in helping us determine, should we expect that activity to continue to grow, to shrink.
Yep.
So track it. Use a spreadsheet. Use HubSpot, free CRM. We use it in our firm. It's phenomenal.
Even if you go on your calendar and look, I took 5 phone calls this month. Start
Do it
somewhere.
retrospectively. That's not a bad idea. Yeah, even if you can't. But again, it's all about building the habit. And I think the 2 habits that were really important, or maybe I should say 3 habits that he mentioned that I would love to underscore. One, of course, being time tracking.
Yep.
The other, of course, being using that information to forecast your work. And the third being record and forecast against your business development activities. I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Good.
Agreed.
Good. All right.
Cool.
It was a good one.
It was. Well, as always, thank you guys for tuning in. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to us on YouTube. And
oh, thank you for remembering to say that. Yeah, do
plug
that.
in.
Yeah, click the thing. Okay.
I think we're on Instagram, and what are our other Twitter?
Yeah, we're everywhere.
We're everywhere. Follow us.
Yeah, very cool. All right, thanks. It's fun.